Hello there, Cheryl here, and I am most happy to see all of you here on the webcast. It is a unique webcast, and this evening I am very happy to have three gentlemen from around who has been working around the world and playing different roles, wearing different hats as the modern man, to join me in this conversation under the Celebrate Women series. Today we're going to talk about men and being under the radar. What has the modern man been doing supporting working women? And this evening, I'm very happy to have Andrew, who has stayed up late. It's 11 p.m. in Sydney, so I am extremely thankful for you for saying yes to this. And then we have Tim Rockell, who has said yes. Again, experience from around the world, particularly in the oil and gas sector. Thank you for joining me. And Federico, thank you very much for saying yes, because you are one of those who have worked in Europe and all, but in the F&B, in the FMCG sector. So you would see different arena and different things being played out for working women. For those of you who are new to me, my name is Cheryl, and I work with leaders to create more contemporary workplaces that is relevant, that's inclusive and high performing. On the other hand, I also work with women entrepreneurs and business leaders so that they can thrive in whatever they do and still enjoy their life without compromising the lifestyle that they desire. So it is my privilege this evening to be hosting this session, an hour or so. And what I've put forth to the three gentlemen is for them to give me a question to ask them. And boy, they rise up to the challenge. Their questions are much more tougher than the ones that I and you as the audience have sent for me to ask them. So hang on there for this hour or so for some insights. If you're a guy, insights that you can take away from as to how you can support your community or women around you. If you are female, then learn what has been done, appreciate that, and learn the secret of how to make the ask, or some of the things that might come across as the gentleman shared that you might want the men in your life to be helping you with. So I'm going to just throw it open to the three of you gentlemen, Andrew, Tim, and Federico. A couple of moments for you to share with us your context and why do you say yes to this particular topic. Starting, I think, alphabetically. Andrew, would you like to get us started?
Okay, so hi everyone, good evening. Andrew, I head up the Singtel Group's corporate sustainability. I'm also a talent coach to the Optus Leaders and Talent Program. Optus is the Australian subsidiary of Singtel. And from a sustainability angle, one of the pillars, we call it, is our people and the social angle. And of course, in that area, the talent, the diversity, the future potential, future skills of individuals, equality is a very big topic for us. And I also lead a team that 50% of my direct reports are women. And it's been a topic that's been something of interest to me over the last 4 or 5 years as I started to get into talent coaching. And many of them are women, and it's given me a lot of insight and built a lot more empathy. And I felt there's a role that I can play in terms of supporting women better in their success, both careers, internal, as well as on a personal front. I've got my wife, my 3 daughters. So it's something I think I've got to solve for if they are going to be successful out there in society.
You're a little bit outnumbered, aren't you?
I am.
Right. So thank you for sharing both your personal and professional, inputs. And Tim, sorry, yeah. Did I get it right? No, Federico, you are next, my alphabetical order.
Okay. Hi, Federico Vescovi. I work for Barilla, which is the largest Italian food company present in a lot of markets in Europe, particularly known in Europe and the US. And I am in charge of running the region Asia, Africa, and Australia. So all the new markets where Barilla joined only recently, let's say. So what we do is really trying to understand the new market, the needs of people related to food and Italian food particularly, with an angle of gastronomy and nutrition, and try to provide solution to our products and how we design our product, but also how we use our product in Italian food, which is a big trend in the new markets. Personally, I'm also father of 3 daughters, so
coincidence
with Andrew, and my life has been really characterized by a lot of women presence in my personal life, of course, in this case, but also my career, and I will talk about a little bit more later.
Right. Okay. Great. So, Tim, what about you? Don't tell me 3 daughters too.
only one son who's aged about 15, so he's about to enter an interesting new phase in his life. Myself, I was born in West London in a place called Uxbridge, which is quite close to Heathrow Airport, and I think it's a place that is quite unique in having lots of roads, rail, and a big international airport on its doorstep. So it's quite an easy place to leave. My career has been 21 years now in KPMG. I look after our energy sector. I've had roles across the United Kingdom, and I've worked in the north of England and across the northeast and northwest. I've worked in London. They then said to me, well, you're very keen on energy. Why don't you try going to Saudi Arabia and talking to Saudi Aramco? So I said, right, I'm up for that. That was 2005. That was another 7 years of my career. And I really started thinking about the role of women in the workforce, but also the role of women in our lives when I was working in Saudi. I have to say, I did cheat a bit. I lived in Bahrain and commuted across the causeway every day, but it's only a 45-minute commute. But that was probably one of the best commutes I've ever had, actually. And then I decided that I wanted to keep moving, and I kept moving eastwards. And an opportunity came up in Singapore. So that was in 2012. So I've pretty much done 7 years in KPMG UK, 7 in the Middle East, based in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and now 7 in Singapore. So I have a KPMG role, but also very active in things like the British Chamber of Commerce, the Energy Institute, and also a group called Women in Energy Asia, to which most of the oil and gas companies belong and some of the other energy companies. And I have to say, I'm the only male on the Women in Energy Asia committee, which I enjoy enormously.
Right. So the 3 gentlemen have given you their bios to set the context as to where they come from a professional perspective, but they have all, advised me to at least say that the opinions that they air are their own, and it's really coming from personal reflection and their own personal perspectives. So let's get the ball rolling. And having observed what's been happening in the last 2 to 3 years, what shifts have you seen in your area of work or in your community around support for women, particularly from men, in them getting to the workplace or work or advancement in their career or having different shifts in their career? Have you seen something that's like more distinctive trends that you have observed? Anybody to get started?
Well, I'll give it a go. I think first I've observed in the last couple of years the interest from men in the topic of women in leadership, gender diversity, gender equality has certainly increased significantly. There was a time 4 or 5 years ago we have a women in leadership forum. They're all women attending, but today I see a lot of men there. So I think that's the good first step, that there's the increasing interest and curiosity to really understand the topic. And we're also seen as more men engage the topic. I have seen a shift in the leadership style of the male leaders. We are in a high-tech industry. We've got an enterprise sales type business. Can be sometimes you say it's a very alpha male dominant type style. But I think the more the male leaders engage the topic, build the awareness, I have seen a shift in their style, which does make a lot of difference in the culture of the organization. Both in terms of the empathy, the mutual respect, just the styles of dealing with different individuals. That makes a bit of a difference as a starting point.
All right. So you do see a shift in terms of the culture, but also bearing in mind, are you seeing more of that in Australia? Are you seeing that as you work across Asia in your role?
Well, definitely a lot more in Australia. It's quite interesting. I worked across the region, Singapore, Philippines, and when I first came to Australia, I wasn't very conscious of the topic myself because, the Singtel and the Globe Telecom, where I was as the chief operating officer, the leadership team was very diverse. In fact, very good balance of women, almost 50% in some areas. So when I came over to Australia, even though it was an issue, I was not very conscious about it until about, in fact, 3 years into my role as a coach. As I started to coach and mentor an increasing mix of women, then I started to actually open up my eyes a bit to the issues, the challenges they were facing. And in fact, Catalyst was really a leader from a HR who came to me for support and advice how to advance the women leadership agenda. And that's when I really started to take a keen interest, and then started to, as one of the signals to the rest of management, focus 100% of my talent coaching efforts into the women talent in the program. So that was a bit of a discovery and a transition point for me.
Right. So that's an observation. What about Tim and Federico? Either one of you gentlemen. What are some of your observations that you know in terms of trends that you have seen that has shifted?
Yeah, I mean, I can take it from my side. I think that in the last few years there is an increase of awareness. Is a general awareness across all the workforce and the communities. And this also is driven by a number of companies that have decided to set the tone, okay, as part of their diversity program. So, and this happened in two ways. On one side, the training for the top management, and on the other side, the recruitment of new people in more percentage as ladies rather than the men. Although, you know, this is a common trend, then if we go one level down, there is also the engagement of some companies to create the workforce environment to make sure that women develop. And I see it very much in Asia, and I see it also in Italy is developing very fast. In the last 3-4 years, and I have to say I'm quite happy that Barilla was the pioneer, for example, of smart working in Italy, one of the pioneers. So allowing every employee to work 2 days from home a week. Then, you know, all the systems starting to be more conducive of creating an environment for women to work at home. And then, you know, the tools are increasing. And I see that there is a consensus. Now, I also put on the table the point that consensus is not yet full result. And this is the challenge that the companies have and a lot of managers have. And I think is where we can intervene as men in order to remove barriers to make the consensus a result.
That's going to be one of my follow-up questions. So I'm going to get to Tim first, and then we will get to the topic that you have just delved on. Tim, your observations.
Yeah, hi, Cheryl. I think I can be quite quick. One of the biggest changes I've seen is in leadership. So in my company, typically we do have a lot of females. The accounting, tax, and advisory profession does attract a lot of females. We're about 55% female in total. Of course, when you go to the top of a pyramid, that number drifts off, but we do have a significant number of partners who are female. But when I look at the global leadership positions and the national leadership positions for KPMG and the energy sector, our global sector head for energy is a lady, Regina Meyer from Houston in the US. Our ASPAC leader, Mina Sekiguchi in Japan, is a rare female Japanese leader. And at one stage in Thailand as well, the head of our energy sector there was also female. So we do have a lot of women now in those leadership positions. So I think that's a big change. And I also see women taking control at events. So most events that I go to now, particularly big conferences and congresses, will have a women in energy event and a forum. And the organisations I'm involved in, plenty of women on the committee, and we don't have things like we have here, which is an all-male panel. I know why you have one, because it's let's hear from the men, but we'll hold off having an event in our British Chamber of Commerce, for instance, if we cannot find a female who can speak to the topic on the panel as well. So we don't have all male panels. So you're seeing a real change, right across the board, particularly at the leadership level.
So I believe this is a privilege for me to have an all male panel, because one of the tough questions I wanted to ask is, what are some of the hurdles? What are some of the hurdles that we need, or what are some of the hurdles that you might have had to overcome in order for you to show up in supporting women in their transition, or working women, or women in leadership? Or what do you see existingly right now are some of the barriers that is hindering or stopping men from being more obvious in their support for their peers who are women to rise to the occasion?
Well, for me personally, initially,
Sorry,
it was
Andrew, before you answer
actually
that, either from
yes.
from a corporate perspective or from a community perspective, in terms of from the household. Yeah. Andrew.
Well, for me, I must admit, at a personal level, initially, just the lack of awareness of the issues and challenges, especially in Australia, there's a lot more structural issues for women in leadership. I'd say the big barrier there was unconscious bias. And in fact, there was an occasion where I had a leadership team. This was earlier on in one of my roles at Optus, where at a town hall, one of my staff called out to say, Andrew, you've got a leadership team of 7 and only one women leader. And it was a HR person. And what are you doing about women in leadership? And I must admit, I was a bit struck by the question. I never thought of it. I never realized it. Even though I always felt as a leader, I felt I was equitable. I looked at meritocracy. I would a very supportive and nurturing leader, but I just didn't see that. So I'll say unconscious bias is probably one of the biggest first steps and barriers. Hence, the issue of awareness and raising awareness and understanding for the topic is a very critical starting point for me.
So do you think then that the more stories we tell about how this unconscious bias shows up, it will then make it, one, create awareness for men, for the modern men to be able to say, okay, I now am attuned to this and I can do something about it. What might be one or two of the things that got you started?
I think getting into the conversation is definitely one area, but again, one of the big breakthroughs was when I really started mentoring the women leaders and the women talent, that, on a one-on-one basis, you really understand the deeper insights, the issues, the challenges, both at the structural level, it can be at the company level, leadership level, and also at the individual level, because this is quite a complex topic. Is actually, there's no one size fits all solution. There's no silver bullet. It's everything from, in Australia, we look at the structural issues around high cost of childcare, inaccessible childcare. The ICT sector is only graduating less than 5% of women from the tertiary institutes. In Singapore, you can get 30% from IT and engineering. So there's some structural issues that need to be tackled. But then when you get within the organization, there are other aspects in terms of, whether the lack of sponsorship, the lack of established network that the women leaders would have, both internally or externally. These are all things that actually need to be addressed for, in a sense, the equality issues to be better balanced.
Right. So, Tim, with your perspective, what do you think? How did you become aware that that is something that you yourself personally can do about, and what were some of the hurdles that you might have to overcome, or hurdles that you see are currently still happening that's preventing the modern man to have taking this conversation out?
Yeah, so I think I first became aware of the issue when I was in Saudi Arabia, where it's very difficult for women to get into the workforce. I'm pleased to say after about 7 years, most of my sales and marketing team were in fact females. And I had challenges even in paying them because women wanted experience so much that they would, come along to the office, pass their CVs almost through the door or under the door, and then offer to work for nothing. And my bosses were quite happy about that. But I said, no, absolutely, if people are wanting to work, then we should be wanting to pay them, a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. And, let's make this real. It's also quite interesting because in Saudi Arabia, you have to keep the women segregated in different parts of the office, and in some cities even separate entrances. So all sorts of challenges there. But we got people working in teams as much as we possibly could. And that really helped the whole dynamics in the office. So, for women working with the men, for women talking to the Saudi men and saying, we expect you, to be here on time. We expect you to contribute, and we really want to make a difference and work and get the best benefits that we can from this international company. So I think that's when I first became aware. It wasn't things like International Women's Day. I actually became aware of that much later on. But I did get involved very early. I was asked by the British Trade Officer in Al-Kabar at the time, and she was female, which was quite rare to appoint a female to a position like that in the Foreign Office. And she asked me to speak to women entrepreneurs. And I did, but when I turned up, I was actually ushered to a side room and told, you'll actually be presenting by CCTV. So a little bit here where you can't see the audience. I was presenting and receiving questions really through the television, which was very strange. But then you have to think, do I cause a revolution here, or how do I make change? So, I'm a big believer in that, many small things, make a big change. So just with, chance conversations with ministers on aeroplanes, talking to people at academia, talking to the companies, the clients that I dealt with, making a difference myself. Those small incremental things, calling things out as you see them, do make a difference. So I think International Women's Day is actually, has been going on since 1911. So you might say, well, why do we still need International Women's Days? But clearly we still do. But each year there's progress. And I think, small steps and, really will get us on this journey to the parity.
I like what you're talking about in terms of every individual taking their own personal responsibility and within their sphere of influence in conversations in day-to-day living to be able to demonstrate or influence the level of support and the level of outreach, right, towards more women supporting working women. What about Federico? You have worked out in Western Europe and through two different FMCGs.
Yes.
What do you see, and how has that evolved? Were there barriers when you started to embrace the idea around supporting working women on your team?
Actually, I've been fortunate in Europe when I was working in Procter & Gamble to have two bosses, two of my managers that really impacted on my development and my career, and they were both women. So at the end of the day, I was helped on my side by women. And of course, one is still Italian and one is Turkish as well. So there was quite of a difference in cultural background. And I started appreciating and understanding the importance and the impact that women can make at work. But I think that now the biggest learning came here in Singapore because after the bias, after the pay, after the awareness, the key point that companies are interested and the workforce, the work environment is interested is business results. And here in Singapore since 7 years, in the first 3 years, I was working in a leadership team that was made only of men. And in these few years, the business went well, but not as well as we expected. After an organizational change, I ended up having a leadership team, a headquarter team made of 2/3 of women. And, I was the minority, definitely. And therefore, I started understanding the strong contribution that they gave, and effectively, we started growing and improving strongly the bottom line. And I think this doesn't come by chance. It comes by the fact that women at the workforce can impact a better decision making. And therefore, this triggered my need and my championing of making women development and work, because it's good for the development of the company. And you know, there is also another point that I started thinking about, that is, how do you develop and support women? Because sometimes in a lot of companies, and I see it as a difference between the Western approach, the development of women is linked to behaving like, having the same leadership as men. But the leadership of women is different. And actually, if it's developed in the inclusive way that naturally is, then it brings to an even stronger impact and coaching to people. And
so I fully am appreciative that all three of you agree on the benefits of having women on the team and on the leadership team. If we want to expedite that process, if you were in the ability, to have the ability to remove one barrier, empower men to be supportive of working women, whether in the home or in the community or in a workplace, what would be one thing that you would suggest the modern men begin to think about or begin to take an active action towards? What might that one thing be? Anybody has any thoughts to get started?
Yeah. Andrew here, happy to add a view here. And in fact, have tried it with some of my women leaders and reports. I call it like a hat trick, triple threat approach. One, you support, mentor the women talent and women leaders. You really work with them behind the scenes to be as good and as ready as they can be. Then two, give them the exposure, the connections to the critical stakeholders, the senior leaders, the C-level in the organization. And three, you then really empower them to take the lead and ownership and the accountability. And I find that that works really well in helping them establish their own direct rapport and demonstrate their own capability, especially when they are trying to, in a sense, break into the upper ranks of management. And it's really allowing them to just demonstrate their own capability, because sometimes they don't have that exposure. They might not have the doors open for them. So that combination, mentor and support, connect and expose them, and then empower them. And I found they are always successful on their own accord.
So the learning here would be whether you are male, in a leadership role or otherwise, where you can to open the doors, make the connection, and help make things happen, in a sense, to set the context for women to take the next step themselves into having the whatever development that they might need, or whatever accessibility that they might require. And you are there as a linchpin, as somebody who facilitate that to happen, regardless whether you are a leader in a leadership role or not.
That's right. And in fact, as a leader, feeling comfortable and confident enough to just let our women talent directly face, and one of my direct leaders directly interacts with all the senior managing directors, engages them comfortably, and I don't even need to be there, right? So from the lens of the other leaders, they actually see her as she is, her capability, her potential, what she can deliver on her own accord. Now, of course, behind the scenes, we may be doing the debates, the discussions, the brainstorming, etc. But let her front. And what I find is when you let them front, that gives them the best exposure, also builds their own confidence, even as it raises visibility for them from the rest of the organization.
Right. Okay. So what about you, Tim? What is if there's one thing that you say, as a modern man, you begin to think about or you begin to do, what would that one thing, what would you suggest they consider?
Well, I think the one thing is to look at the barriers as to, so why are women leaving a particular industry or profession before they get into leadership positions? And some of these things are as simple as, you know, the more senior you get, or you know, as you kind of get older and build a family, travel gets in the way, or it could be that busy seasonal work gets in the way. But instead of just saying, "Oh, men take up the slack and women leave the profession," or women maybe shift to a part of a business where there's not a need for so much travel or so much slack, but really just look at the systems and start to eliminate that. Because I think it's fair to say that if some of these things like extensive travel, long working hours are, you know, the bane of women's lives and prevent them from performing a role, they're pretty much going to be the bane of men's lives as well. But there's an attitude that men will just pick up the pieces and put the nose to the grindstone and leave the house on a Sunday night and come back on a Saturday morning, or be working till 11 o'clock at night in certain countries and cultures. So, you know, there is technology now. We can eliminate those things. We can work smarter. We can plan better. We can smooth out peaks and troughs in the workload. We can have conference calls like this where we don't all have to sit in the same room together and broadcast to an audience. So, you know, a physical audience. So let's start to look at what's preventing women getting to leadership roles. Let's listen to the women, but then let's make a change to the business which affects both men and women. And so everybody's lives become more enjoyable because, you know, men want to play a part in their families' lives. You might have heard some cooking going on earlier in the background. I think that's good. Normally I'm standing in the kitchen kind of pointing at pots or shaking things around or pretending to contribute. So I can't do that this evening. But, you know, I like to do those things. I like to be involved in, you know, the life of the family. So let's try and eliminate that stuff from the workforce for everybody.
Right. So another point that I like that you brought up is, as we remove those barriers, let's remove the barriers for all talent rather than just women, right? And it will have then an overall positive impact across the entire talent pool. Excellent idea. Federico, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the key objective, the key tool we can use summarizes in one behavior that, depending on the context, change name. I mean, in work is coaching, with friends is suggesting, in family can be guidance or confidence. So it's making sure that the women are ready to take on the challenge. Now, I think that the biggest barrier are sometimes the men, because especially in the workforce and sometimes also in the household, they see the woman as a potential opponent or a potential rival. And therefore, no matter the training on bias, no matter the all the tick the box exercise that you can do on a work point of view, no matter the amount of women you recruit from university or you appoint into the board, women don't get into leadership. So, and I think this is the inner problem of the middle management, who are usually men in the middle management. So are the one that sometimes might block this. And the result and the outcome is making sure that we coach the men to understand that if they develop a woman, there will be two leaders and not one. There will be two success and not one. So it's not either or, it's win-win. Because at the end of the day, we will have a new women in leadership and we will have a new man that will be inclusive and therefore will very likely get into another leadership position.
Right. Okay. So there are different ways, either personal by influencing in terms of your own sphere of influence, and then we look at how we can remove barriers so that, you know, everybody would have a chance to rise, or we look at it from a perspective where we are creating wins of leaderships across the board instead of just having it in a very siloed position. I want to take the conversation now to perhaps a little more personal perspective. in your growing up years, gentlemen, have there been women in your life that have made an influence that allows you to have a greater sense of maybe a quicker sense of awareness or a quicker sense of empathy towards women in the workplace or women in your community? They have allowed you to maybe the reason why you said yes to this interview. There has been certain influence over time that has gotten you to this particular position to say yes, this is something that I feel and I want to support.
I'll give it a go at a personal level. 3 weeks ago, actually 3 weeks ago to date, my mom passed away. And as she passed away, I did quite a bit of reflection on what is it that my mom really left with me, and there are many aspects, her values, her style. She was a very gentle, very respectful individual, yet a very strong, resolute individual. She was an individual who was always very nurturing, very selfless, always optimistic, always supporting people. So there were a lot of qualities I felt in my mom that just to share influence, had influenced myself in terms of my own personality and style. And through my whole career, I've never led or behaved differently from that in every situation, at every levels of leadership. And what I found is those styles actually are quite universal. When you show mutual respect, when you nurture people, when you are supporting the development and the growth of others. My mom was a very charitable individual, so always thinking about others and those that are the minority groups or at a disadvantage. So I found those same qualities, if we just lead in those same qualities, and many are qualities of women and qualities of others, I actually think business and society will actually be a lot more inclusive for women talent that's out there.
Right. So it's the early influences does have a part to play in the way that we respond to the current situation. Federico, I want to jump over to you because you mentioned that you had female bosses as part of your career growth. Did they have an impact on you in the way that you see women in the workplace, or were there other influences that allow you to be more empathetic towards this?
Definitely, they had an impact on me because they had to deal at the time with a person that grew up for 23 years or 24 years in Italy, which, despite coming from again a society where women might not look very evident, but they have a lot of power. In the Italian society, the women have a lot of influence in society and in the life of the family. And now, finally, more and more, since a few decades, are having a more impact in the social life. But at the end of the day, they had to deal with someone who was very ambitious, who had a certain point of view, and ended up into an international exposure, because I was in Geneva at the time in Switzerland. And the ability they had was to lead me by hand, both of them. So trying to understand who I was, which were my, how I was functioning as an Italian man, and then sitting in at the right point when they realized that I was able to listen, and when they saw the window of listening, very simple, actionable concepts. And effectively, they changed my management style. And they really then made me understand more about the importance of work-life balance, the importance of taking care of people at 360 degrees, while keeping on being focused on the result I had to have. So it was an exercise that both of them did, I have to say, in an excellent way. And I am very thankful for them, for who I am now.
Right. So, Tim, what about you? Any early influences that allows you to have that develop that empathy towards working women?
Yeah, it's interesting working women because I think my first teacher was a great woman and had some fantastic teachers going through school. But I think it's interesting growing up in England. I think some countries don't respect this. We do have a queen who is head of state and seen as a big leader, and she's been a big stable for a long time. But then we had the first female prime minister, Margaret Thatcher, in the UK. And I think what was interesting, the influence that she had was maybe not so much, yes, she's a woman and she's made it, but it's kind of, it got me really thinking what she had to do to get into that position. So it was almost like she had to kind of, we've heard about, it's kind of voice coaching. She had to lower her voice. She had to speak at a different tempo. She had to dress in a certain, power way. And, in some cases, she almost had to kind of, be a kind of a tougher man than a man, if you like to kind of succeed in a man's world. And, you kind of listened. In those days, there's no television in Parliament, but you listened, and, if she kind of shrilled occasionally, then she would kind of get the men would shrill back. And I was kind of thinking, well, that's crazy behavior. So why do women have to change to get into these positions? But that then gets me thinking about everybody. Everybody is different. Everybody has their own needs and desires. Everybody wants to put a roof over their family and have a good life for themselves. They might behave in certain ways at work, but you really have to kind of look at the root cause of that. So I think in terms of influences, I would say, the kind of politicians, just seeing Margaret Thatcher, but just really not from a position of kind of, respect, but it really kind of, what did she have to do to get to that position? And I think, people shouldn't really have to change. Of course, we have to change our dynamics, but we shouldn't really have to change our personalities and, the way that we talk just to get on in the world. And I think you start seeing certain changes now, but, you really have to take people for who they are and build that inclusivity. We talk a lot about diversity, but I think the key word is about inclusivity. Unless you have that, it's no good having the diversity. So she was a real kind of influencer, I think, just in the way she got me thinking.
Right, absolutely. So I like to think that in all our lives, in all the paths that we have had, that we have had people who come into our life, taught us some lessons, and that at some point in time, all of us have had the opportunity to learn a little bit more about inclusion, and therefore we show up a little bit more when it's a topic around inclusion and how can we bring out the best in others. My final question for you actually came from one of the LinkedIn posts that we have, and it's from a female, and she is trying to. Her question is, glad to be hearing from these three gentlemen. Perhaps what would be one suggestion, or what might be one way that we can broach the topic to our male colleagues or male leaders or my spouse as to the help I need? What might be one way that would be conveyed in acceptable manner for them to say, yes, I will help you? Anybody who has had that opportunity to have that asked from somebody before,
I have been asked from some of the women that I mentor and coach, and I always tell them, back yourself, just ask, because if you don't raise it, most times there isn't even the awareness of the issue or your need or your desire or your aspiration. So, back yourself, have the confidence, raise your hand up for things. And most times, actually, the leaders are quite objective about it. And many wouldn't even have thought that was either a need, an issue, or an interest or an ambition. And I've always seen where they have raised it and felt comfortable about it. The conversations have always more or less, most times, been very professional.
Right. And Tim, what about your perspective? how can a female make the ask, in a sense?
I think the key thing is just to ask the question and ask lots of people the same question. I think it might be you, Cheryl, a previous session that I attended of yours said, sort of build your own personal board of directors, and that really resonated. So I hope it was you that said that. But I think build up individuals around you. They could be your coach, but bounce the question off them and then work out how you might need to ask the actual question. But ask the question and make sure you get an answer. There's different ways you can ask questions in an office. You can close the door of the person's office. You can ask it on a forum and get people talking about it. But do make sure you get the answer, and do make sure you get you get a change if you actually need that change. And I think companies, particularly multinational companies, have a big responsibility to ensure that happens on the ground.
Actually, that's interesting that you brought it up, Tim. How can multinational organizations engage men in supporting the workforce?
Yeah, that's a good question. And sometimes when I'm sitting in your seat, Cheryl, I quite like to ask that question to people kind of sitting around me. I think corporations, particularly multinational corporations, really have a responsibility on diversity and inclusion and what they will tolerate around the world. So we know, take maternity, for instance. I'll talk about paternity in a minute, but maternity leave. There's different standards all around the world. So why should an employee of an oil and gas company in, say, Indonesia have just a couple of months off work in terms of statutory maternity, whereas an employee who's in Europe, something like Sweden or UK, can take 1 or 2 years off? There's possibilities now that men want to be involved in the early stage of their child's lives. So actually sharing that maternity and paternity, that really enables women to, first of all, look after their child, but also decide when they want to return back to the workforce. So it's not a case about, oh, we need to bring help in or we need to get help. There is help, and that can be shared. So in the energy sector, oil and gas companies, mining companies, they have a base standard for health and safety, which they won't tolerate from their employees or their contractors. You've got to achieve a certain minimum in health and safety standards. But when it comes to diversity policy, I was quite often very happy just to fall back to what's the norm in that particular country. And I get people say to me, well, it'll cost the company more money, won't it, if they give more people time off? But the response is, well, they won't have any employees or customers in 20 years' time, if that's the approach, right? The workforce has got to grow, and we need to kind of support everybody in doing that. And people have to budget for it. In Europe, people know that their HR budget will have to add on 20, 25%, 30% to allow for all of these benefits that people have. So it just has to be factored into budget. So really, multinational companies, I think, should start to standardize some of these policies around the world, just like they've done for health and safety.
Right. That would be a most interesting exercise to see, actually. Let's get on to Federico. Federico, your 3 daughters. I'm going to ask you a challenging question. Your 3 daughters. How would you coach your 3 daughters to be able to make the ask?
Being very honest. That's the simple only thing. Be sincere, be honest. Be sure that if they ask, they have the right to ask. And I have to say that in a lot of contexts at work, in my career, I came across, met women that were not daring to ask just because they thought the question was inadequate or they were inadequate, and it was completely false. It was only in their mind because the society tended to shape them and the environment around tended to shape this thought in their mind. And that's the reason why, and I go back into the point of team, especially the bigger companies have a duty in making sure that men and women champion the development, which means to me making sure that not only they promote women, it's easy, But what is even more important is that they create the conditions whereby the women are free to express themselves and the audience around them are able to see what they are building with the women and the capabilities they are creating in the women. And once this is done, then it's absolutely right for a woman to ask the question. This is personally what I aspire to do with my daughters. They are still very young, but one now is getting elder, so is getting to the age where this reasoning can be done.
Right. So I have got 3 boys, and I've always told them that whatever you know, the person has influenced me the most in my growing up years was my grandma, and she's always said, be kind to others, be respectful to others, and be able and be an enabler of others. And I think if we allow ourselves to be an enabler for others, then all of us will be able to enjoy what we do, and then we'll be able to live a life that we all enjoy. So, gentlemen, I want to have one last question with you. And if I were to say, next International Women's Day, if I were to call you back here and ask you what is one change you have seen happen over the last 12 months, what is that one wish that you see would happen?
Should I go? I think I'm seeing more and more organisations actually having International Women's Day, but then sharing experiences between different organisations. So I attended one last year where it was a mix of many multinational companies, and I think there was really added value from that. So I think also we met Cheryl at National University of Singapore, which was holding its first Women in Business event. So
yes.
I've seen videos where people say, we'll know we've solved the problem when we actually stop asking the question. But in some places, we haven't even started to ask the question. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important that we encourage more and more groups and communities just to kind of, reflect on International Women's Day. But then, like you say, think about it every day. But have these events as a launch pad to make things happen. So that would be my ask, or wish, is that more organisations were thinking about this and taking the lead by themselves, but then collaborating to share ideas.
Sure. All right. Andrew and Federico, what's your one wish?
For me, the wish would be for Singapore companies to actually start to have a focus on diversity and inclusion, both for the workforce as well as how they operate out in society. I do see the multinationals, they do that, they put a focus, they're experts who understand the topic and raise the topic and sometimes create programs, and this do help. Whereas in Singapore companies, I think it's something that's lacking. And I'm not just talking about women in leadership, but all elements of diversity in that sense and all elements of inclusion. Because I think to the extent that the principles of diversity and inclusion, the advocacy, many of these are universal principles, it will help the agenda for all the diverse aspects of the workforce. Right. That would be my wish.
Okay, so although you are doing something for a specific segment, it actually raises the bar for everyone else to be able to have that benefit from that. Excellent, thank you. And Federico, your one wish.
My wish is that we, in the community, in the company I work for, there is every day the attention to women and every day the willingness to develop them. Making sure that there are actions that are followed up by the managers regularly, and that the managers of the managers ask about and take as a commitment from their collaborator that manage women. Because at the end of the day is making sure that this really comes through day by day, not only in the top of the organization, not only in the recruiting, but very importantly in the middle of the organization, making sure the promotion happen, and by next International Women's Day having more women promoted and more company coming together to share this kind of approach, having more barriers removed for women in their organization every day.
Right. Right. So I hear what we can do on our individual responsibility in terms of our sphere of influence, what we can do if we are leaders, and really what three of you have articulated is that leaders really spend time and not just articulating it, but really spend time ensuring that the barriers are being removed. And I sure wish that the next time when we have this conversation 12 months from now, we have shifted the needle a little bit more than just having the conversation and awareness. And I love the idea, Tim, about let's have something that is not just silos, but something that is a little bit more collaborative that we are able to share across. It's going to be a dream come true if we host an event at the Padang and we have in Singapore, and that all the companies in Singapore will come together and share what we are doing and what we are doing on a personal level, day by day, to be able to build a more inclusive organization across our organization, but also beyond the boundary lines. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time, Andrew, Tim, and Federico. My name is Cheryl. For you who have joined us for the hour, fantastic. We thank you for spending your evening of 1 hour with us. Well, there you have it. A very interesting conversation indeed. If you have enjoyed that particular episode, subscribe so that you do not miss any of the training that is available or any of the interviews that I have upcoming. If you are a contemporary leader leading in a volatile, complex, uncertain, and ambiguous time, well, this particular platform is for you, where you need to be relevant, where you need to be inclusive, and you need to be high performing. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and follow me on LinkedIn, where you will get information, strategies, and insights that I do not share on this particular platform. And also subscribe to my weekly newsletter, either on liveworks.asia or the 24hourwoman.com, where I go deeper into being a contemporary leader in a world that is VUCA, that is volatile, that is uncertain, that is complex, and that is ambiguous, where you are a leader then who is relevant, who is inclusive and high performing. And if you are a women business leader or an entrepreneur, then subscribe to my weekly newsletter in the 24hourwoman.com, because that's where I help women business leaders and women entrepreneurs to thrive in whatever they do and still live a happy, vibrant, and fulfilling life. My name is Cheryl. I look forward to following you on your progress, and you following me on LinkedIn on my progress, as we live a life that's most excellent.